Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 138, and today we're covering 1 Chronicles chapters 21 through 23. We're in the middle of David's life, and Chronicles is continuing to show the good parts version. It's omitting a lot of David's sins, and it's showing you a lot of the vertical components and the worship and the relationships between the kings and God. And that's exactly what we pick back up with in chapter 21. We see a recounting of 2 Samuel chapter 24 when David wants to take a census. We get an interesting note here in verse 1. It says, "Then Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel. So David said to Joab and to the princes of the people, 'Go number Israel from Beersheba even to Dan, and bring me word that I may know their number.' Joab said, 'May the Lord add to his people 100 times as many as they are. But my lord the king, are they not all the Lord's servants? Why does my lord seek to do this thing? Why should he be a cause of guilt to Israel?' Nevertheless, the king's word prevailed against Joab. And so David commissions Joab to go number the census, to go take a census. He gets the number. And verse 7 says, God was displeased with this thing, so he struck Israel. David said to God, 'I have sinned greatly, and then I have done this thing. But now please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly.' And as we remember from Samuel, the Lord speaks through Gad, David's seer, and he says, look, you got 3 options the Lord is offering you. 1, you can either take a famine for 3 years, or 3 months you can be swept away by your foes while the sword of your enemies overtake you, or else 3 days of the sword of the Lord." And you remember David's statement, "I'd rather be in the hands of the Lord, for his mercies are very great. Do not let me fall in the hands of man." And that should be our cry as well. It's a terrifying thing to fall in the hands of an angry God, but it's also the most reassuring thing to fall in the hands of a gentle and gracious God as our Father. And you can see both of those sides of him. Both of those things are true. And David chooses God, and the Lord strikes. He sends a pestilence, and 70,000 men fell in verse 14. And it says that David and the elders covered with sackcloth fell on their faces. David said to God, "Is it not I who commanded to count the people? Indeed, I am the one who has sinned and done very wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? O Lord, my God, please let your hand be against me and my father's house and my father's household, but not against your people, that they should be plagued." And something that's interesting about this is that God uses the restoration of this sin to push David to buy the threshing floor for where the temple will be. And that's how this chapter closes out. Verse 18, "Then the angel of the Lord commanded Gad to say to David that David should go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite. So David went up at the word of Gad, and Ornan looked at David and went out from the threshing floor and prostrated himself before David with his face to the ground. Then David said, 'Give me the site of this threshing floor, that I may build an altar to the Lord. For the full price you shall give it to me, that the plague may be restrained from the people.'" And we see here the place where the temple is to be built. And that quite naturally drives us into chapter 22, where David tells Solomon, verse 1, "Then David said, 'This is the house of the Lord God, and this is the altar of burnt offering for Israel.' And David said, 'My son Solomon is young and experienced, and the house that is to be built for the Lord shall be exceedingly magnificent, famous and glorious throughout all the lands. Therefore now will make preparation for it.' So David made ample preparations before his death." And so throughout the rest of the chapter, David is giving very careful instructions to Solomon on how to carry out the building of the temple. And he knows that he can't build the temple because he was a man of war. In verse 8, he said, "The Lord came to me saying, 'You have shed much blood and waged great wars. You shall not build a house to my name, because you have shed so much blood on the earth before me. Behold, a son will be born to you who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side. For his name shall be Solomon, and I will give peace. And remember, these are the golden years during the time of David and Solomon. It's as good as it gets. And remember, one of the themes of the Bible is to get back to Eden, to get back to rest. And it's the closest that it ever gets under the reign of Solomon. Chapter 22 closes out with verse 19, which is the most important instruction. Now set your heart and your soul to seek the Lord your God. Arise, therefore, and build the sanctuary of the Lord God, so that you may bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the holy vessels of God into the house that is to be built for the name of the Lord. And that moves us into Solomon's reign. And in chapter 23, verse 1, it says, Now when David reached old age, he made his son Solomon king over Israel. And obviously we know, if we go back to 1 Kings, there was a lot of struggle there with Adonijah and him trying to usurp kingship. But Solomon reigns, and he gathers together all the leaders of Israel with the priests and the Levites. And chapter 23 is just the naming of these officers. You have the office of Levites. They're numbered from 30 years old upwards, and their number by census of men was 38,000. And you basically see all of the work there. 24,000 was to oversee the work of the house of the Lord. 6,000 were officers and judges. 4,000 were gatekeepers. 4,000 were praising the Lord with the instruments which David made for giving praise. David divided them into divisions according to the sons of Levi: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the rest is breaking down each of those. Verse 7 breaks down. Verse 7 through 11 talks about the Gershonites. 12 through 20 talks about Kohath. It lists some of the sons of Kohath and gives their purpose. And remember, they handled the inner workings and the furnishings. And lastly, the Merarites. And the chapter closes with the duties of the non-priestly Levites. Because remember, all priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests. And the rest of this chapter shows you what the non-priestly Levites' duties were in the service of the temple, which we talked about in Numbers chapter 3, but it's reiterated here. And you see the continuity of God, and you see how Israel has become a great nation, and now they have a permanent place, not only to dwell, but to worship. And it took us a long time to get here, and we're just looking back at everything that happened and chronicling it. And when we get to the prophets, we'll be able to dig more what happened around these kings, their sins, how they were rebuked, and how they were judged. And if you hadn't thought about this up until now, look at the meticulous care that God has given you to preserve his word. He writes it. He has books of giving you information. He has books of reviewing information he already gave you to teach you from a different angle. And God created the soul and the mind, and he best knows how to train it. And he knows that repetition is one of the best devices in learning information. And God is really good at that. He even knows how to do it to Psalm, which is the book of Psalms. And we'll get there eventually as well. Probably got a little over a week left in the Chronicles. Then we'll move to Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. You guys take care and catch you next time.